So we are in a brand new series today, and it's called Before You Walk Away for Good. Before You Walk Away for Good. And I hope that if you've had a chance to just kind of think about this series and process it before you came in, that you might realize what we were kind of talking about together in the huddle this morning, which was that this isn't one of those series that like a church puts together so that all the people outside the church can become Christ followers and come inside and be just as good as we are. In fact, if this is your first time with us, you probably saw all the signs that say things like "No perfect people allowed" as you came in. As we were huddling up on this and talking about it this morning, we talked about the fact that this topic, which is basically at the very heart of it, is the question, like, do we need God anymore in 2018? And so that question, which deals with things like faith, it deals with things like just the big questions that you ask and you don't really feel like you get good answers to throughout your life. And all of that stuff kind of just bunches up together and causes that huge question of who even really needs God anymore. And so what we put together is this series where we basically say, look, we realize some things in the church. We realize that in many cases, the fingers need to be pointing back at the church for a lot of the things that have that we've kind of had our hands in over the years. And so in admitting that, we move into this first step in a series that I really hope just kind of changes you, no matter where you are. Because no matter where you are in your walk, if you're one of those people that's like, oh, I've been coming to church for 35 years, I feel pretty good. I got a heaping measure of faith. I can just enjoy these next 4 or 5 weeks. Forget about it. There's something in here for you too. So before you walk away for good, the first question I want to put up is this. Why can't we just know that God is real? You ever thought about that before? Like, we know. I don't have to take by faith that my wife Katie is real, right? That's kind of cool. I can just see her. There she is. She's real. I don't have to take by faith my kids. There they are, every day, all the time. You ever feel like that? I don't have to take that stuff by faith. So why was something as vitally important, as just earth-shatteringly important as God? Why can't we just know? Why can't we just know? So as we ponder those questions, because some of us have kind of lost faith, some of us have a little bit of faith, some of us have a ton of faith, and some of us are just about ready to step away forever. And while we ponder that, let me just put this out there and have you think about this for a second. All the while that we're sitting here right now, we are traveling 67,000 miles an hour around the sun. 67,000 miles an hour. That's like 20 miles a blink, right? So blink, 20 miles, blink, 20 miles. Not even a breeze in here, right? So I'm just going to leave that there for you. 67,000 miles an hour around the sun. We are in what's called the Goldilocks zone, right? Here where we live on Earth, the third rock from the sun, we are in the Goldilocks zone. That means that we are the perfect distance from the sun that we don't burn up and that we don't freeze. The Goldilocks zone, right? So not too cold, not too hot. And everybody said, just right. All right, that's good. I got some Goldilocks fans up in here today. All right, so let's move on. Honestly, when we get into this topic, the real question I think that's on people's minds is, do we even need God anymore? In 2018, we got all this science, we got all the different innovations. We know so many things that we've never known before. Do we really need God anymore? And that's when you look at that video, I think hopefully you got the gist that that's what that was about. Like, we've been to the moon, we've been to we're getting ready to go to Mars. Check out my nice SpaceX shirt I wore for the occasion today. So do we even need God anymore? And then, as I pondered this question and looked at it, I thought of it another way. And the question really is, and on a lot of people's minds, do we really need religion anymore? Religion. Because I think you will find, and hope you will agree, that there is actually, and if you don't agree yet, stick around, there is a huge difference between God and religion. Huge difference between God and religion. So the question then is, do we really need this religion stuff anymore? And I think a lot of the readings that I'm going to bring up today, and I'll just go ahead and tell you right off the top, all of them are written by atheists, because I want to provide you with that construct. I want to show you that, because I believe, and a lot of times if you've grown up in church and you've asked tough questions before, questions like, hey, how come, like, did these continents ever fit together when you look at, questions like that, and you got like this, well, the Bible says this, and I believe it, so let's leave it at that and let's move on. You ever had an answer to a question like that? So that leaves a lot of people thinking, well, I don't know if we need this religion stuff anymore, because now if I want an answer, I'll just Google it, right? My son Ben used to say, let's Google it up when he was little. Let's Google it up. So now let's just go ahead and take a step, because we're going to talk about sort of a turning point in American society specifically, but of course this changed the world as well. How many of you can remember like exactly where you were on September 11th, 2001? Pretty much everybody, yeah. And that's one of those things where, if you ask a question like this 50 years from now, there's not going to be as many hands. People have heard about it. People have learned about it. But we were there. Like, we witnessed it in some way, shape, form, or fashion. Like, I remember watching the TV. I was working at Applebee's at the time, and I had to work the lunch shift. And I remember just flipping on the TV, had my coffee in one hand, flipping on the TV, and I looked and I saw, like the World Trade Center just sort of burning. And I remember thinking, oh, what is this? Like some footage from the bombing back in the day, from before? And then I heard him talking about a prop plane, and then suddenly I'm watching the screen and I can see this airplane like crossing the screen, just slow and steady it looked like to me, and just right into the World Trade Center. Man, do we really need religion anymore? Why would God allow something like that to happen? Now, part of the reason that I wanted to do this, the first message in this series, is because what I can do when I'm first is I can ask all these hard questions, and then I can just punt all the answers to Scott when he does the next message, next week and the weeks after that. So I'll just leave that right there, and if you really want to know the answer, come back next week. Now, after 9/11, so we established where we were, we talked about all that, but let's talk about after 9/11. After 9/11, something happened, okay? The week after 9/11, the first Sunday after 9/11, what do you think happened in churches? Flooded, she said. They were packed. It was bigger than Easter. And I like Easter. I don't know about you guys. I'm often, in the past in my ministry, I've often been accused. One time a guy said, is it just Easter every Sunday with you? And I said, thank you very much. I appreciate the compliment. But these churches were packed. And so now I'm going to visualize something with you, because you've already picked up that I'm a little bit of a mover. I move around. The lighting people figured it out first. So I'm going to consider this side of the stage over here walking toward God. Okay? So after 9/11, the crowds of people, the throngs of people just flooded into the churches after 9/11. Now, why did they do that? This is an interactive session. I'm a professor. Okay, scared. I heard they were scared. What else? Hope. They needed hope. So they're looking for answers, right? Does that make sense? We were just talking about that, how people go to church to look for answers to tough questions, and then they get told, well, God said it, and I believe it, and that's good enough for me, and then you just move on from there. So the second weekend after 9/11, what do you think happened in the churches? Flooded again. Second time in a row, bigger than Easter. The third week after 9/11, what do you think happened? Completely back to normal. Now, why was that? Do you think people just did they need a fix? Did they need like a Jesus fix, and they came and got it, and now they're good to go till the next tragedy strikes? No, they didn't get the answers to the questions they were asking, right? They didn't get the answers to the questions. Now, something else was also happening after 9/11. While America and the world was basically giving churches 2 weeks to get them some answers, Sam Harris, who is a neuroscientist and also a leading atheist scholar in the world, really, he started writing a book. And it's called, let's put that up. It's called The End of Faith by Sam Harris. He started writing this right after 9/11. The End of Faith, and the subtitle, if you can't read it, says Religion, Terror, and the Future of Reason, right? The End of Faith, Religion, Terror, and the Future of Reason. So Sam Harris wrote this book, and this is, by the way, it's a scathing critique of religion. It's basically saying, in the wake of 9/11, we don't need religion anymore. This needs to go. We need to get rid of it. So as you can imagine, perhaps if Sam Harris had written a book called The End of the Muslim Faith right after 9/11, probably would have gotten some traction with publishers, maybe, right? But since he wasn't singling out Muslims, since he was like singling out everybody, nobody wanted to publish his book. So he actually got turned down by 12 publishers. 12 publishers. And if you have ever had any experience with writing anything, whether it's a song or a book or a story, and you've been through like rejection letters, man, that never feels good. But 12 times, now it's telling you something. But Sam Harris was persistent. This guy wants to spread I don't know if you can say gospel, because good news, I don't know if atheism is good news, but he wants to spread the news of atheism everywhere, and he wants people to stop being religious, because it's the problem, basically. That's what's going to solve all of our problems. Well, after he got lucky 13 to publish his book, The End of Faith, he was on the New York Times bestseller list for 33 weeks. 33 weeks. So people were hungry for this stuff. For 33 weeks, right? How many weeks did people stay flooding the churches after 9/11? Just 2, versus 33 for Sam Harris on the other side. Now let me ask you a question. Do you think that what Sam Harris had to say was more comforting than what the churches had to say? Probably not. Do you think that it made more sense than what the churches had to say? Well, I don't know. Today, we're not here, and you may be surprised by this, but let me just go ahead and say it. Today, I am not here to speak on behalf of Christianity or to speak against atheism. Fair enough? I think that if your faith is grounded in something solid, then you don't have to shy away from the Sam Harris books of the world. And a matter of fact, I read it cover to cover. And so did a lot of people. And a lot of Christians sent a lot of nastygrams, which I assume are much nicer than non-Christians. But they sent a bunch of nastygrams to Sam Harris after the book. So much so that Sam Harris said, you know what? These Christians, let me show them. I'm going to write another book, and it's going to be just for them. And it's called Letter to a Christian Nation. So he basically, after calling out all religions and saying that all religion needs to end and is bad and all that stuff, now he has followed it up with Letter to a Christian Nation, which is just a scathing critique of Christianity specifically. And you know what? I read that too, and I got to tell you guys, I'm not an atheist, but there's a lot of really good points in both of those books. Isn't that, can you process that with me? Is it possible that this atheist could be making some excellent points about Christianity while saying some things that I don't agree with about how the world all came together? All right. As a matter of fact, I'm so grounded in this now that on today's YouVersion, if you go in there, I've got Amazon links to all the atheist books that we're talking about today. And if you want to read them, then you should go ahead and do it. Let's end this whole thing about Christianity where we just close our eyes and we don't look at the stuff of the world. Let's end that because our faith can stand on its 2 feet, and I think that's exactly where we need to progress as a country and definitely as a Christian faith. So, Sam Harris writes this follow-up. That same year, Richard Dawkins, who is another leading atheist scholar, writes a book called The God Delusion. I read this one too, The God Delusion. So this is, well, you can see first off, it's a New York Times bestseller, just like the one we looked at before. And you can pretty much guess what this is about, right? It's Richard Dawkins is saying that the whole God thing is a delusion, that there is no God. So he is, would it be fair for me to say that perhaps when Richard Dawkins wrote this book, that he was trying to persuade people to not be Christians anymore and to be atheists instead? Is that fair? Let's dig in and see. He actually wrote in the beginning of his book exactly why he was writing his book. Let's put it up there. It says, if this book works as I intend, religious readers who open it will be atheists when they put it down. So thanks for he's direct. You got to give him that. So I want you to process that quote for a second. If this book works as I intend, religious readers who open it will be atheists when they put it down. Now, he sold over 3 million copies of this book. It was translated into more than 35 languages, and it definitely spent some time as well on the New York Times bestseller list. So far, I think what we're stumbling on is that regardless of whose stuff is better, whose content is more compelling, that the church has really swung and missed in the wake of 9/11. But the atheist scholars are taking hold because people are looking for answers from somewhere, right? The next year, Christopher Hitchens, who's a journalist, wrote a book called God Is Not Great. And you can kind of tell what high esteem he holds God in if you look like way up at the top of there in really, really small gray letters. He's letting you know what he thinks. But then if that wasn't obvious enough, he says in a subtitle, How Religion Poisons Everything. Now, when I picked up this book, I looked at the title, God Is Not Great, and I said, I don't agree with that. And then I looked at the subtitle, which says, How Religion Poisons Everything, and I said, okay, you got me there. I do agree with that. Religion can poison everything. So the gist that these three authors that we're talking about, the gist that they are presenting to us is this, that religion is not a part of the problem. Religion is the problem. These guys are saying everything that's wrong in the world, basically, is based on religion. So that's going to be something tough to prove, I think, right? And if religion itself is the problem, then what do we do about that? That's kind of a quandary. Maybe might be another one I'm going to kick down the road to Scott for week 2. But I think more than anything, that what's really happened to people who find themselves kind of stepping away, because remember back here, this is being close to God. People that have found themselves sort of backpedaling away, they've done so more because of religion than because of the message of Jesus. And let's put that next one up. Religion and the God I grew up with. This would be what I would imagine that most of these folks would say. Religion and the God that I grew up with have lost their appeal. Ever felt like that before? Like, you think back to the days of the flannel boards and Sunday school and VBS and all that stuff, and you're like, ooh, those cookies were the best. Those were the best times. But when you grow up and you start asking grown-up questions about your childhood faith, you expect grown-up answers, right? You don't expect the same childhood answers of, well, the Bible, and all that stuff. Now, the scriptures are precious to us, so don't let me get you off course there and thinking that I'm going off in that direction. But what I will say is this. Telling people all the time, whenever they have a tough question, just to believe blindly, is the road to getting people to backpedal away from God. In fact, I'm backpedaling because most people don't even know what they're walking toward as they walk away from the church, as they walk away from God. And what they are walking toward is actually the polar opposite of theism, right, or belief in God. It's atheism. So let's put that up and let's see. So here is how, after all those millions of books were sold, and let me just say this too, Christopher Hitchens and Sam Harris and Richard Dawkins, those guys were rock stars. Like, they were selling millions of books. They're going on talk shows. They're on every single TV show. They were living the life of a really, really popular dude. And this is their report card. This is how we end up. 7% of people in the U.S. Are atheists. So what that means is basically that regardless of what those guys were writing, regardless of what they were saying, and even regardless of what people were saying in these churches on those 2 weeks where they had our undivided attention after 9/11, people were not turning around and walking with their eyes open toward atheism. They weren't. They were just backing away from God, and backing away from the church. And that means that there's actually a whole nother category of people other than people who go to church, theists, and people who are atheists. And those people actually have a name now. They are called the nuns. But you have to be careful about how you spell that, the nuns. Now, this graphic that I'm showing you, this is actually the chunk of what America looks like now for the millennial generation. 35% of them consider themselves a part of the nuns. And what that means is that, they're not saying, hey, I'm an atheist, I don't believe in God, I don't believe God exists. They're not saying that at all. What they're saying is, I don't want to be here. I don't want to be in this church. I don't have good times when I'm here. I don't have good feelings when I'm here. I don't get answers to my questions when I'm here. I don't feel love when I'm here. And that is what they're saying. So that actually, to me, as a pastor, is pretty good news, because it means that we haven't jumped all the way to that atheist category where you just believe there is no God and never was. And so those of you who you might be actually on a journey of self-discovery today, some of you might have actually find that you're in that category, and that's okay, because now you have a category. Congratulations! You can call your mom and dad after this. They're so worried about you. You can say, "Don't worry, mom and dad, I'm a nun. I'm a nun." But you have to spell it. You have to spell it. And I'll just give you this as a little tidbit. If you zoom out away from just the millennial generation, it's more like 23% of the total U.S. population. That's still 1 in 4. So if those books did nothing else, they at least pried people away from the belief that we got to punch our clock card in church, and we got to make sure we just punch that clock enough so we can go to heaven one day. And it pushed them in the direction of walking backwards away from God. And so the nuns, they would say that we're not hostile toward religion. We can move this next one. We're not hostile toward religion. We're just not affiliated with it. So, really, they're just standing in the middle. They're saying, I don't want you to ask me a bunch of tough questions. I know I'm not with those guys. Don't know about these guys, probably not with them either. I'm just here right now, so just leave me alone, let me be, let me do my thing. Now, the majority of the nuns in the U.S. migrated from the Christian faith. And I mean, that's the primary faith in the United States anyway, so you probably already assumed that and imagined it. But the majority of the nuns in America migrated from the Christian faith. And I'm going to say something bold, and then I'm not even going to run off stage after I say it, because I believe it and I'm going to stand behind it. For Christians that have migrated in to the nun category, it is the church's fault. It is the church's fault. And I'm going to tell you why I think that. Because if you read the 4 accounts of the ministry and life of Jesus, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, if you look through those pages, and if you've spent very much time here at Forest Park at all, we spend a lot of time in those pages. And if you were to, for those of you who are here all the time, if I said you got to give me one word to describe the way that we present God in this place, what would it be? There it goes. See? Welcome home. So, here's the thing. When you open up those Gospels and you look through the account of Jesus, what you find is something really amazing. And here it is. People who were nothing like Jesus liked Jesus. People who were nothing like Jesus liked Jesus. And you know what? Jesus liked them back. Jesus liked them back. They didn't have to punch their cards. They didn't have to wear a certain thing. They didn't have to be a certain thing. They didn't have to be at a certain place. They didn't have to be there at a certain time. People who were nothing like Jesus liked Jesus, and he liked them back. That right there is earth-shattering. So earth-shattering and groundbreaking that they put that guy up on a cross and made sure that he didn't hang around. People who were nothing like Jesus, liked Jesus. So with that message in mind, if you distill the message of Christianity down to that simple thing, which is simple but not always easy, then here's what I got to say. If Christianity is that easy to walk away from, given what we know about the Gospels and the message of Jesus, if Christianity is that easy for the nuns to just walk away from, then I'm convinced that we might have the wrong version. We might have the wrong version of Christianity. And here's what I know from a lifetime of growing up in church. I've heard some stupid stuff in church. I've heard some things in church that I thought, could this possibly be right? And I've heard just as much of it from like up here on the podium as I have from the people out there. And hearing those things and having spent that time in church and knowing all that stuff, man, I can't really, it's hard to blame people who would say, hey, I'm a nun, I'm walking away from this stuff. It's hard to do that because not only growing up in church, but growing up in a pastor's family, you get even more of a look at that stuff because you live in a fishbowl. Everybody knows everything about you all the time. Whenever you do something, it's different than when somebody else does something. And it just gets to the point where it's like, man, I think I'm just going to bounce. I'm out of here. And I have definitely felt that way in my life. But these things that people say in churches, we're going to talk a lot about them over the next few weeks in this series. And some of that stuff is pretty offensive. And, the ideas that if you're walking away from church, if you are one of those who is losing faith and you're about to step away, the ideas that you find so offensive that they make you want to walk away forever, much of that stuff, much of those things are things that Christians should have walked away from a long time ago. A long time ago. And so, for the next few weeks, the purpose of this series is to try to fix some of that. Now, we're not so ambitious as to think that we can just like turn this whole thing around for the whole planet Earth, but it's got to start somewhere. And I know that just my own lived experiences and the things I've seen people do and the things I've heard people say and the people that I've seen kicked out of churches and the people I've seen embraced and brought into churches, man, it's no wonder. Like, how is the church still alive? I don't know some days. I really don't. And so we're going to spend these next few weeks really trying to distill this Christianity thing down to its very, very basic truths. And then we're going to see if after that there's something that it's hard for somebody like me, and I have a relationship with Jesus Christ, and it is very hard for me to see how that would not be appealing to other people. And so, like I said a few slides ago, if it's lost its appeal that much, then perhaps we have the wrong version. We got the wrong version of Christianity, and that's what we're going to spend our time doing. And today we're going to start with the hardest one, okay? So we're going to head out to the far reaches of everything, and using the books that I talked about just a couple of minutes ago, we are going to provide an update on atheism. We're going to call it Atheist 2.0, I guess. And the reason that we call it Atheist 2.0 is that there are a lot of tenets of atheism that have been around for a while, and then there are some new ones that come from the new atheists, and that's where Sam Harris falls, Richard Dawkins falls. That's where all these guys that we've been talking about sort of fall in. So, and that's that 7% chunk of the U.S. And the reason I want to do that, the reason I want to start at the far reaches like that, is because I think it's important to know that you cannot move away from something without moving towards something else. And that, by the way, I don't think any atheist would disagree with, because that follows the laws of physics, right? To be walking away from one thing necessarily means, even if I'm walking backwards and can't see it, I am walking toward something else. And I think that you should know what that is. So that's what we're doing. That's what we're going to spend that's why I read all these books cover to cover. Somebody said after the first service, hey man, you really read that stuff? That's disturbing. And I said, yeah, you got to see all sides of things, right? So That's what brings us where we are. You can't move away from something without moving towards something else. All right, so atheism. What is atheism? Here we go. Atheism is, and you're going to be surprised by this, some of you, is a complex belief system that logically leads to some unsettling conclusions. Doesn't that sound more like Christianity? Right? It's a complex belief system, and it leads to some unsettling conclusions. Now, I want to point out, though, and a lot of people wouldn't think that atheism is that because they just think that to be atheist is just to not believe in God. But that's not really true. That puts you in the muddled middle. You got to choose a spot. If you don't believe in God, then that means that you believe that there is no God, and then you have to believe a whole nother slew of things about how we all got here. Does that make sense? So that's the road we're walking down for the rest of these next few minutes today. So atheism, a complex belief system, logically leads to unsettling conclusions, and I want to point out that unsettling is not a truth test, okay? Unsettling is not a truth test. Just because something is unsettling doesn't mean that it's not true. Now, let me just give you an example, right? Ready for this? Your teenage daughter's boyfriend, right? It's true, but it's unsettling all at the same time. He's really there. You really have to contend with this guy, with his stupid haircut and his motorcycle and his leather jacket. It's unsettling, but it's true. So unsettling is not a truth test. Something can be true and unsettling at the same time. So I want us to kind of spend the rest of the time, keep that thought in your mind as we do it. Because what we're going to do now as we finish this up is we're going to talk about the 6 basic tenets of atheism. Because I want you to understand, if you are stepping away from God and from the church, I want you to know what it is you're walking toward, because you deserve to know. You don't want to just be stuck in the middle somewhere. So the first tenet, let's put it up there. The first tenet of atheism is the illusion of the mind. All right? So stick with me here. It's going to get a little murky for a couple minutes. The illusion of the mind basically says this, right? If there's no God, there's no you in there. Does that make sense? If there's no God, then there's no you in there. Because without God, without a creator of the universe, then what you have instead is biology and chemistry driven by the laws of physics. These are the atheist teachings. I'm giving them to you. I'm not trying to talk you out of or into anything. I'm just presenting them straight from the books. So the illusion of the mind means that if you think you're thinking stuff, that's an illusion. If you feel like there's something to you other than just your body and your chemistry and your physics, putting one foot in front of the other, then that's an illusion. Because without God, without a spirit, right, we're saying that there is no spiritual presence in this world if everything truly runs on chemicals, biology, operating under the laws of physics. So the illusion of the mind says if there is no God, there's no you in there, and that means that everything you do is just what you do, and that's all there is to it, okay? I think some of these other tenets, I'm not going to go dig too much more deeply into that one because some of these other tenets will help you understand that, but I do want to mention Christopher Hitchens one more time, a journalist. Now, Christopher Hitchens died in 2011 of complications related to cancer, and once he knew that he kind of had like a pretty much a death sentence of a cancer, Christopher Hitchens started to write another book, and he's the one that wrote God Is Not Great. So Christopher Hitchens sat down to write one more book called Mortality. So it's basically this, by the way. What a read. Mortality is Christopher Hitchens. It's basically the journal of a dying atheist. So this is a guy, like he's going to go all the way out, holding on to this, there is no God, God is not great. And that book chronicles that. And in the book, though, he's detailing some conversations that he has with some of his doctors because as he's going through these treatments and everything, the doctors say things like, Christopher, your body's not responding to this medication, so we're going to try another one and see if we can get your body to respond to that one. And, and it keeps coming back to your body. And Christopher Hitchens, being one of the new atheists that really penned some of this illusion of the mind stuff, says this. He says, I don't have a body. I am a body. He says this to his doctor. I don't have a body. I am a body. So what he's doing is he's reinforcing that basic first tenet of atheism, which says that you can't be separate. There's no mind that's separate from body. It's all one thing. It's run by biology, chemistry, driven by the laws of physics. Okay? I think we're good on that, and we'll move right on. Let's go to the second tenet of atheism, the illusion of free will. Now, this one, kind of fell flat in the first service when I said it, so I'm just a little nervous here. Let's see if you guys do better. What I said was, I've been to churches before where I felt like I went out of there thinking that this was what they believed, that there is no free will. Have you ever felt like that? Like, God has that plan for your life, and you can't do anything about it, and he's just, you're like a marionette puppet, and he's, taking you where he's going to take you. Well, first of all, go ahead and shelve that and file it away, and we'll get it and put it on Scott's list for next week. But the second tenet of atheism, according to these new atheists, is the illusion of free will. It says that you don't have it. You don't have free will, because if we go back to number one, right? If there is no you in there, and there is no mind, you're just biology and chemistry driven by the laws of physics, then there is no free will. There's no ability for you to act opposite of the plan of the universe. Because if the whole universe is run based on just natural laws, then you may have experienced something that felt to you like choosing your spouse. You may have experienced something that felt to you like making decisions. But based on the second tenet of atheism, you have never made a free choice in your entire life. You can't do it. There's no God to give you a spirit to allow you to do it. It's impossible. I'm not saying that's true, but what I'm saying is that these guys, these smart guys that are the authorities on atheism, say that if you're an atheist, you need to believe this. Okay? So I'm not saying it's true, but they definitely are. Got to pick a side at some point. So the illusion of free will, it brings me to something I want to say that's kind of funny. Now, Sam Harris, who wrote that first book, The End of Faith, that we talked about, and then Letter to a Christian Nation, he has a podcast called Waking Up with Sam Harris. And I've listened to some of these, and he gets, a little ornery from time to time. But a few years after he wrote The End of Faith, and as he's working through Letter to a Christian Nation, Sam Harris got all upset one day on his podcast. And I can get you the reference if you'd like to hear it. But he got all upset on his podcast because these people were, they were basically disagreeing with him, right? And they were, taking him out of context, and they were criticizing. And he got tired of hearing it, so he just kind of let a little rant loose on his podcast. And then he stops himself, almost jokingly, but not, and he says, you know what? I have no right to criticize my criticizers because they have no choice in the matter. So, in other words, he is reinforcing the second tenet of there not being free will, and he's saying that these people who are criticizing me were born to criticize me. They have no choice in the matter. They had no free will in the matter. They simply are following the universe's plan and criticizing me. So that's the second tenet. But, and by the way, this idea that we don't really have any choice in the matter, that it's all, that there is no free will and that you just kind of walk through life and, everything kind of happens to you, that's called determinism. And Stephen Hawking, who recently passed away of ALS, man, what a brilliant guy, an incredibly brilliant guy. And he believed in determinism. He believed in that. But he kind of cracked a joke. He was a funny guy, too. He kind of cracked a joke at one of his lectures one time, and I want to put it up on the screen and read it to you because it's so good. He said, I've noticed that even people who claim that everything is predestined and that we can do nothing to change it, look before they cross the street. Right? Because, based on the second tenet, if you're going to get hit, you're just going to get hit. And that's how it's going to be. A lot of times when I go to my doctor for my annual physical, I always try to, let me do a confession here. I always try to get in the best shape right before my physical. So I get there and he says things like, well, you're my most healthy patient. And the last thing he always says to me is, well, something happens to you. It was just meant to be. So there's tenet number 3. And, you know, when Andy Stanley was doing the Who Needs God series, which this is heavily based on, he said something about this. And I want to just read that to you too. He tried to live as if he were just biology, you know, because, you know, I'm biology, my wife's biology, we're all going through the motions. And he said, you cannot live as if you were just biology. If you try that, you will be locked up by other biology, and you will lose the free will you never had. So just having a little fun with that there. All right, let's go ahead to tenet number 3, because my timer says I'm already out of time. Tenet number 3 says there is no value. I think this is the toughest one. But again, it's linked to the others. Because if I brought you, I mean, basically, we're saying, with one exception that we're going to get to in a couple of minutes, we're saying that if you can't see it, it ain't real, right? So there is no mind, there is no you, there is no any of that stuff. And so I can't bring a box of value and open it up and say, look, it would just look empty, right? So that tenet says that there is no value. There's no way to ascribe value to something, or there is nothing inherently valuable. We only ascribe value to things, but that in itself is also not real. There is no value. Now, this actually also begs another statement that we have to contend with a little bit, because if we don't value anything, what that really is it's just the absence of any kind of a universal agreement. You know, like a lot of times people say things like, especially on opposite sides of this argument or opposite sides of political arguments, they'll say, you know, you have your truth and I have my truth and you can just, you know, leave me alone and leave me to myself. But nobody that's like sane ever says, you have your justice and I have my justice, right? Justice is a universal concept. We all know that when we look at something, have you ever looked at something and you're like, that's not right? That's not right. That's a universal thing. That's something that's within us. And that also, according to atheism, is an illusion. It's an illusion. So just, you know, for something to be just is just what we want it to be. Just is just what we want it to be. All right, so now we've been through 3 of the tenets, and those are the bulk of the new atheists and what came from their literature. So the rest of this is going to come pretty quickly at you. Let's go ahead and go to number 4. This is a classic. Something came from no thing. All right, does that sound like anything you've ever heard before? Sounds a little bit like Genesis 1:1. But something came from no thing. So this tenet says that out of nothingness came something. However, this is where the complex belief system comes in for atheists, because we don't know what that is, right? We don't know. And if we look at this next slide, what you had was the Big Bang, and then you have all time, matter, space, laws of nature, laws of physics, and all of that stuff. Now, I love talking about the Big Bang because it's where I really found my faith for the first time. We can look at the universe, measure the universe, and see that the universe is expanding and it's speeding up. Like, that's just a fact. If you study science, that's what's happening. It's expanding. Now, that means you can also rewind that, right, and see what happened at the beginning. And I love thinking about that complete rewind just before the Big Bang, where they teach you in school that every bit of matter in the universe could fit on the head of a pin, right? So where'd that come from? Where'd the matter that fits on the head of the pin come from? So that's where I found my faith. I remember thinking, well, that had to be created. I mean, our own laws that we're relying on here say that matter can neither be created nor destroyed. So if matter can neither be created nor destroyed, then where did the head of the pin come from? I'm fine with the Big Bang. I'm fine with all that stuff. We can't say before because there was no time before the Big Bang, and there are a lot of rules you have to sign up for if you're going to go down this road. We can talk some more about that stuff. But I want to point this out, that the Richard Dawkins, who's one of the premier atheist scholars, has admitted as much, by saying that cosmology is waiting on its Darwin. Darwin, of course, gave us evolution and natural selection. But there is no such theory to explain cosmology, which is like, you know, the origin of everything. So as Andy Stanley put it in the Who Needs God series, he said, we're still waiting for someone to come up with a theory that explains why anything exists. We're waiting for that scientific theory to explain why anything exists. So if you want to go down that road, if you are moving toward that atheism path, I have some terrible news for you. You are going to have to believe something that you can't get any proof for. And that's that something came from no thing. And I can't tell you anything more than that. So that is where you're going to have some faith if you want to be an atheist. All right? Now let's move quickly from there. We got tenet number 5. First life emerged from no life with no help. So that just means that now we can talk about all this stuff now that we've dealt with the head of the pin and we had the Big Bang happen and we got the planets and we got all this stuff we were singing about it a little while ago. First life emerged from no life with no help. That means that molecules somehow gathered themselves together without any kind of motivating force and came to life with no help. With no help. So first life emerged from no life with no help. And then tenet number 6, the final one. See how fast I told you we were going to move faster after that. Natural selection is responsible for all life after first life. So we have now explained fully atheism and all 6 of its tenets, ending with the fact that natural selection is responsible for all life after first life. Now, instead of giving you the Bill version of what natural selection is and how that works, or sending you back to your science textbooks to do a homework assignment, I am going to actually give you a rather lengthy quote. In The God Delusion, Richard Dawkins actually put it into words. And the first time I read it, I thought, is he making fun of evolution? Is he making fun of the atheist perspective? I wasn't sure because I struggled with it, and I'll talk about why in just a second, but I want to read you that rather lengthy quote, and if you're going to be like snapping pictures with your cell phones, you better do it quick because I'm reading fast. Here we go. Richard Dawkins says, think about it. On one planet, and possibly only one planet in the entire universe, molecules that would normally make nothing more complicated than a chunk of rock gather themselves together into chunks of rock-sized matter of such staggering complexity that they are capable of running, jumping, swimming, flying, seeing, hearing, capturing and eating other such animated chunks of complexity, capable in some cases of thinking and feeling and falling in love with yet other chunks of complex matter. Let me just step outside of this whole message and do a little bit of relationship advice. Guys, don't refer to your spouse or your girlfriend as a chunk of complex matter. It's not going to work out for you. It's not going to work out, okay? That one's free. That one's free. So after reading this lengthy description of how natural selection works, Richard Dawkins goes ahead and does this number and says, we now understand essentially how the trick is done. So that's it. Everybody good? Yeah? All right. Now it's my turn. I have a confession. I'm wrapping up. It's hard for me to talk about natural selection or to really even read about it, especially that whole thing that we just read. It's hard for me to read it and take it for what it's supposed to be, which is just that all this stuff sort of happened all on its own, without looking at it and thinking, is it possible that we had all this Big Bang stuff, we had all this evolution stuff, we had all this natural selection stuff, but that there was like this force behind it with a plan and a design that put those chunks of rock together and that made sure that they worked the way that they were supposed to? And that's my quandary. That's where I kind of have to step outside of that and say, I think there's got to be something more. And it's hard for me to talk about it and read about it for that reason. Because it requires that I come to terms with this invisible, relentless, focused, disciplined, like you can't put it out of business, you can't stop it, totally untamable, hopelessly unstoppable force without asking the most obvious question. How can this all be so perfectly designed, yet have no designer and no agenda? And maybe that's true. Maybe all that stuff is true, right? That all that stuff we just read about, just like the force that isn't controllable and it just happens and everything falls into place and we don't have any choice. Maybe that's how we all got here. Maybe. I think, though, it's really unlikely if you walked away from church, if you stepped away from God, whether you did it backwards or forwards, I think it's really unlikely that you walked away because of any of the things I just said. That atheism was like so much more appealing to you than believing in God, that you were created with a purpose. I really think that's true. Chances are you actually walked away because of something a lot more personal, didn't you? I mean, what'd they say to you? What did they do? What pain did you go through that made you wonder? Is there even a God out there? What things that you just could not explain? What questions did you ask that you just could not get the answers to that made you backpedal away into the mushy middle or even all the way over to the other side of thinking? Yeah. Chances are you walked away for something way more personal. It's not that you have suddenly found atheism to just be incredibly appealing, right? That's not it. It's just that your version of God has lost its appeal or it doesn't seem real, right? Let me just say this to you in closing. If that's you, if your version of God has lost its appeal or doesn't seem real, that is okay. You're in the right place. You are okay. You are in the right place. So before you walk away for good, I want you to consider this. The God you quit believing in maybe never even existed to begin with. So you lost or you're losing faith in God. But maybe you lost or are losing faith in that little g, God. A God that never existed in the first place. The whole point of this message today, long though it may be, and I'm sorry, is to shine a light on the only alternative to God. I wanted you to catch that. I wanted you to fully come out of here with a full understanding of what atheists believe and what new atheism, updated very recently, believe, and to shine that light on the only alternative, because that's the choice that you're eventually going to have to make. Now, it's possible that there's no mind. It's possible there's no you in there. It's possible there's no free will, that you don't get to make your choices. You don't have any value, neither does anybody around you. It's possible there's no justice and that's not real. That's a fake concept too. And it's a possibility that there's no rhyme and that there's no reason. But here's what I know about you. We hope not. We hope not. And our only hope for that hope is God. So before you walk away for good, hang with us. Hang with us for these next few weeks, because next week Scott's going to get in here and he's going to talk about the gods of the No Testament. He's going to talk about the gods you grew up with that never existed to begin with, and we're going to knock those bad boys out one by one by one by one, and you can't miss it, because this is going to be the series of the year. I am so totally sure of it. Before you walk away for good, make sure you make a plan to be here with us. Thank you so much. Have a great day. You're dismissed.